Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Just Jank. I'm your host, Brian Marksinoren. A little bit about me by way of introduction. I started playing Magic around 1997, and 4 years ago I was lucky enough to meet an amazing group of friends who introduced me to the Commander variant. I immediately fell in love with the expressiveness of the format, and that ability to express myself is my primary drive to keep building and playing my decks. I love nothing more than building incredibly convoluted and absurd Rube Goldberg machines, or decks that some people call Judge Tribal. So this video series is kind of a love letter from myself to the EDH format and the EDH community. Each video is going to follow a standard Magic the Gathering turn. Untap, upkeep, draw, pre-combat main phase, combat, post-combat main phase, end step, and cleanup step. Just like a normal Magic the Gathering turn, the untap step is kind of automatic, and we've already passed it. So let's go to the upkeep. In the upkeep step, we're going to refresh ourselves on what Jank is and isn't. But first, this episode is brought to you by Wendell's Real Food and Drive-In, located in the attic of your local Wendy's. Wendell's, come for our potato crispums, stay for the rest of your life. So what is Jank? A lot of people will say that Jank is an unplayable or just bad card. More broadly, it could be a deck that's unplayable or bad, or even just cheesy. Personally, Jank means convoluted combos and win conditions, or even a lack of a win condition. Jank is dedicating myself to suboptimal sets of cards, plays, and concepts. It's finding something silly or fun or even stupid about the game and expressing that to the rest of the table. With that said, let's talk about what Jank isn't. Jank does not mean sacrificing power. It doesn't necessarily mean every card is bad. Like I said, I've been playing since 1997, and I have some powerhouses in my collection. Also, in my usual play group, I'm known for assembling incredible amounts of value. 45 treasures just waiting to be sacrificed, a grip of 80 cards, responses ready at a moment's notice, or 11-11-11s ready to trample across the battlefield. So just because I can win doesn't mean I'm going to. It's pretty unpredictable because, like I said, this is just Jank, and who knows what's going to happen. Just because I'm trying to chase down a meme deck recreating the Onyxia wipe animation from vanilla World of Warcraft doesn't mean I'm not going to play a Mox Diamond or a Cyclonic Rift. I do actually want to win, just not more than having fun. Now let's go to the draw step. Today's deck is the first one I saved on Scryfall.com, and it features Rienne, Angel of Rebirth, as the commander. This deck is basically multicolored creature tribal, and it's themed overwhelmingly after Rienne's ability text, which reads, other multicolored creatures you control get +1/+0, which is a nice little lord effect, but the second bit is where it gets interesting. Whenever another multicolored creature you control dies, return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. This is a remarkably powerful effect that we're going to abuse to the best of our ability by putting in way more creatures than a deck, even a tribal deck, really should have. If you've ever watched the Command Zone show on YouTube or listened to the Command Zone podcast, Josh Lee Kwai and Jimmy Wong will tell you that a theme deck should really only have about 30 cards dedicated to that core theme. Maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more. In this deck, we have 45 creatures. That's way too many, but that's okay. This is just Jank, and we do what we want. So, it's probably obvious why Rienne is so strong, but just in case, it's a built-in recursion engine. So you theoretically always have access to it because it just goes back to the command zone. And as long as there's a multicolored creature and Rienne is on the battlefield, you can use that creature to achieve some desired state, probably by running it into a blocker or sacrificing it for an ability, and then you just get it back again. That's really good, and we're not even in the color black. We don't need to have cards like Exhume, Victimize, or Zombify. Even though our commander is in Naya, we're doing just fine. So that said, let's set up our game in the pre-combat main phase. In the pre-combat main phase, we're going to discuss how we develop our game plan and board. Anybody who's played more than a couple of games of Commander will remind you that ramp is absolutely essential to playing the rest of the game. We need enough mana in later turns to cast some of our high-cost bombs. For ramp effects, we only have 3 rocks, because this is just jank, and we do what we want. Those cards are Felwar Stone, which is a nice little color balancing card, Commander's Sphere, same thing, and Chromatic Lantern, which fixes the rest of our land base. For more stapley effects, we've got Solemn Simulacrum, aka Sad Robot, Cultivate, and Kodami's Kablammy. We also have Farseek, which is great because we actually do include a couple of shock lands in the deck. After that, we start leaning into our core concept of multicolored creatures. We have Karametra, God of Harvests. And since we have a 45 creature deck, this card should really do some work. We've got Jurta Druid, which in addition to being a mana dork, pings our opponents down, and every little bit helps. We've got Knotvine Mystic, which incredibly is not part of a cycle, and Wizards should have fixed this years ago. This is a great card, and I hope if you play a Naya deck, you're playing this one. We've got Selvala, Explorer Returned, which is an incredible card. She's an incredible commander all on her own. She's mana ramp, life gain, and card draw in the right situation. We've got Grand Warlord Rada, and since we're a 45 creature deck, we're probably going to go to combat and swing at our opponents as much as possible. So if we're going to do that, let's make some mana at the same time. Then we turn to the more powerful side of the spectrum with Smothering Tithe and Gaia's Cradle. I said I'd been playing since 1997. I said I had some powerful cards in the deck. Stop looking at me like that. What? For lands, we've got the usual assortment of multicolored pieces, Command Tower, some shock lands, etc. And a notable jank callout, Jungle Shrine, which comes in tapped, but does tap for 3 colors. It gets more interesting in the utility lands because we have Emeria, the Sky Ruin. And there actually are 9 planes in the deck, even though I've got a wide spread of non-basics. And this is going to allow us to recur Rienne if we ever do lose her without actually paying her mana cost again, because that tax does add up. We've got Grove of the Guardian, which we can sacrifice for a beater in the endgame. Mosswort Bridge, because we might want to cast a large creature spell later in the game, and we're going to get to 10 power very quickly. We've got Reliquary Tower, the greatest card in the game, and Rogue's Passage, which might let us sneak in for commander damage if things go poorly enough. And finally, the Spain Stage, which can be any one of our other non-legendary lands. So, with that out of the way, let's figure out how we start fighting our opponents in the combat step. In the combat step, we talk about the creatures that'll do the heavy lifting in terms of a classical win of just beating our opponent's faces into the ground and reducing their HP to 0. First up is Rurik Thar, the Unbowed. A fantastic commander in his own right, it deals 6 damage to any player that casts a non-creature spell. This is especially great for us because we're a just jank deck and almost half of our deck is creatures, so we're going to be taking that damage a lot less often than our opponents will. Deus of Calamity is a land destruction piece, but again, we're a just jank deck and we need every edge we can get. Also, if our opponents are playing smart, they won't be taking that 6 damage very often and having their lands blown up. Maybe. Ravager Worm is an amazing piece that scales with the rest of the game because we can keep pumping more and more mana into X as we recast it with Rienne's ability, and it has a fight mechanic to potentially remove a blocker or a utility creature on our opponent's board. Gisela Blade of Gold Knight is a bomb in this deck. We've got a lot of creatures that get bigger over time, and Gisela doubles that damage. It also doubles the damage that Rurik Thar will deal when a player casts a non-creature spell. And on top of all of that, she halves the damage we take from our opponents. She's ridiculous. Speaking of ridiculous, we have Zakama, Primal Kablamity. an amazing utility creature that can deal with creatures, artifacts, and enchantments, and on top of that, it's in a fantastic body to put into combat. Speaking of bodies going into combat, we want our bodies to be as big as possible, so we've got multiple Lord effects pumping our creature's stats. There's Knight of New Alara, Balefire Liege, Nobilis of War, Wiltleaf Liege, Tolsimir Wolfblood, and Trostani Discordant. Tolsimir is notable because he also provides us with life gain and a fight mechanic to potentially remove one of our opponent's threats. Trostani is great because there might be a blue player at the table playing Control Magic or something like that, and we don't have a homeward path in the deck. Then there are more pieces that scale with the game like Apocalypse Hydra, another X spell, Enduring Scalelord, and Juniper Order Ranger, which work directly with cards like Savageborn Hydra and those +1/+1 counters that it'll get, Ironroot Warlord, and Armada Worm, which will make more tokens as long as the game goes on, and Voice of Resurgence, another token generator when it dies. When we go to the attack step, Xenagos, God of Revels, is going to make one of our creatures absolutely enormous, and Samut, Voice of Dissent, is going to make sure that our creatures have haste, so that even though our creatures are dying and we have to cast them again, and we don't have the ability to cast them with flash, we can still attack as soon as we cast them. Erois, God of Victory, provides some protection for those times when we want to really pump the damage out turn after turn without necessarily relying on the ability to recast them. Rith the Awakener is basically fodder for Gaia's Cradle. There's some pretty big costs in this deck, as well as some X costs, and we really need Gaia's Cradle to be pumping out the mana. Enlisted Worm is a fantastic include because Rienne makes us recast our creatures, and recasting a Cascade creature will help us go through the deck at an accelerated rate. Finally, there's Oversoul of Dusk, and I'm not really sure what this is doing in the deck besides it being a pretty good Selesnya creature that fits right into Naya, and it has some okay protection abilities. So that said, let's move on to the post-combat main phase and talk about how we finish the game. In the post-combat main phase, we talk about how to protect our game plan, build momentum, and arrive at a win condition. For protection, we start with Dauntless Escort, Loxodon Hierarch, and Safi Eriksdottir, all three of which sacrifice themselves so that we can recur them with Rienne, and each of them protect our creatures from board wipes and targeted removal. Kasali Pride Mage starts us on the offensive protection path by removing cards like Sphere of Safety and Ghostly Prison so that we can swing in for the win. Artifact Mutation and Aura Mutation are two similar effects that also provide fodder for Gaia's Cradle. And finally, Aura Shards works heavily with our game plan because whenever a creature enters our battlefield, and we're going to be casting a lot of them, we're going to remove an artifact or enchantment from our opponent's side of the battlefield. I mentioned that our protection pieces sacrifice themselves, but not all of our pieces do, which is why we need sack outlets to build momentum. Brian Stoutarm starts us off with fantastic removal and lifelink ability all in one. Greater Good sacrifices our increasingly large creatures for card draw, and Altar of Bone is a sack outlet and tutor rolled into one. Unfortunately, it's sorcery speed, but that's where Samut comes in. In terms of building momentum, we've got Guardian Project, which just like Aura Shards depends on us casting creatures over and over again for very good card draw. Dragon Arch lets us drop one creature onto the battlefield per wheel of the table at instant speed, so even though it's not a cast, it is situationally useful. Eladamri's Call is the third and final instant in the deck and is an actual tutor, so maybe we can fish Samut out. And Sunbird's Invocation is a cascade-like effect that is going to do a ton of work, mostly like Enlisted Worm as the game goes on. And finally, in terms of resetting the board, we have Ulasht the Hateseed, which can whittle our opponent's creatures down, and Nova Blast Worm, an amazing utility creature for when things look very dark, very grim, and the best we can hope for is to clear the board. But what about actually winning, besides just a combat win? I'm glad you asked. There is one board lock combo in the game, and that card is Realm Razor. With Realm Razor, Rienne, and a sack outlet, we can prevent our opponents from ever tapping a land again. So unless they have instant speed reactions or a lot of mana rocks, they just won't be able to play the game anymore. All we do is cast Realm Razor, remove all the lands, and on the end step before our turn, we sacrifice it, bringing the lands back into the game. On our turn, we untap our lands, do whatever we want, and the final action in our turn is recasting Realm Razor, removing all the lands one more time. It's a Just Jank show, not a I don't care if I never win show, okay? Let's go to the end step. In the end step, we summarize why this deck should still be considered jank, despite having powerhouse cards like Sunbird's Invocation and Gaia's Cradle. Recall that we have about 45 creatures in the deck, which is about 15 more than we really should have. None of them have flash, we only have 3 instants in the entire deck, and our instant speed interactions for our protection cards are creatures, which we can only cast at sorcery speed. Dragon Arch might let us plop one of them onto the battlefield at instant speed, but we don't have any way to tutor Dragon Arch out. In a 4-player game, we're going to be spending about 75% of our time waiting for our turn to take actions again and watching our opponents take actions against us. We are more or less at a heavy disadvantage unless we luck out and get into some of our excessive card draw like Greater Good and Sunbirds, and maybe if we draw our board lock with Realm Razor. With all that said, let's go to the cleanup step. Here on the cleanup step, I want to thank you so much for watching me ramble on about a really stupid deck I made quite a while ago. And I definitely want to thank our sponsors, whoever they are, whenever they choose to exist. I'd like to also extend a special thank you to Ben Culp of Once Lizard, Sometimes Snake for our theme song here on Just Jank. Ben recently released a new album, The Parable of the Dreamer, and you can find it over at the band's website, olss.space. That's Once Lizard, Sometimes Snake. Link in the description. Finally, to the cowards at Wizards of the Coast. Print the rest of the card library on jumbo oversized foil cards. Here at Just Jank, we are only interested in big, powerful plays, and I can only make the biggest, most powerful play of all time when I can assemble a 100-card deck of jumbo, oversized foil cards. Get on it. That'll do it for this episode. Thanks again, and remember, you don't need a great deck to have a great time. See ya.